Picture this: a small American town where the ground beneath your feet burns at 800 degrees Fahrenheit, where smoke rises from cracks in the pavement like ghostly fingers, and carbon monoxide seeps through basement floors, turning homes into death traps. A place where the government spent millions of dollars, not to save it, but to make it disappear. They tell you Centralia died by accident, but accidents don't systematically bulldoze homes that were never in danger. Accidents don't erase 1,000 people from existence with surgical precision. People think Centralia just died, that it was an accident. But accidents don't bury street signs or erase graveyards. Accidents don't make entire neighborhoods vanish overnight. Let me tell you what they want you to believe happened. May 27th, 1962. The volunteer fire department in Centralia, Pennsylvania, decided to clean up the town dump before Memorial Day, just like they did every year. They set a controlled burn, standard procedure. Nothing unusual about it. Local firefighters had done this dozens of times before without incident. Except this time, something went wrong. The fire didn't stop when it was supposed to. It spread to an exposed coal seam in an abandoned strip mine adjacent to the dump site. The flames went underground into a labyrinth of coal tunnels that stretched for miles beneath the unsuspecting town. These weren't natural caves. They were man-made passages, carved out over decades of intensive mining operations that had honeycombed the earth beneath Centralia, like a massive underground city. The coal company maps showed hundreds of miles of interconnected tunnels, some reaching depths of 300 feet below the surface. That's the story they tell you, a simple mistake that spiraled out of control through a series of unfortunate coincidences. The official narrative says the fire was too deep, too widespread, too dangerous to extinguish. Government officials claimed they tried everything. They pumped water into the tunnels. They tried to seal the entrances. They attempted to dig trenches to contain the spread. After spending $3.3 million in failed firefighting efforts over 16 years, they threw up their hands in defeat. Too dangerous, they said. Everyone has to go. But it doesn't explain why homes with no damage were bulldozed within days of condemnation. It doesn't explain why families who wanted to stay were forced out at gunpoint by federal marshals. It doesn't explain why records vanished from government archives, or why journalists who asked too many questions suddenly found their careers derailed. Here's what they don't tell you about the evacuation process. When the government declared eminent domain in 1985, they didn't just target the damaged areas where houses showed signs of heat damage or where dangerous gases had been detected. They condemned the entire town in a sweeping action that left no room for appeal or negotiation. Houses that had never shown a trace of underground heat, whose foundations remained solid and cool, were marked for demolition. Families who had lived there for generations, whose basements registered normal temperatures, whose air quality tests came back clean, were told they had exactly 24 hours to pack their entire lives into boxes and leave forever. No exceptions, no appeals, no second chances. Margaret Boyle lived on South Street with her husband and 3 children. Her house showed absolutely no signs of fire damage, no heat signatures, no smoke emissions, no dangerous gas readings. The government's own environmental tests confirmed her property was completely safe, but when she refused to leave, federal marshals showed up at her door with an ultimatum. They gave her a choice: accept the government's buyout offer, which was significantly below market value, or lose everything through forced eviction proceedings. She took the money, but not quietly. Before she left, she asked a question that haunts this entire story. If my house is so dangerous, why are you planning to demolish it with heavy machinery instead of letting the fire do the work? If the underground fire is really as widespread as you claim, wouldn't my house eventually collapse on its own? The government's answer: complete silence. No explanation, no justification. just bureaucratic stonewalling that became the standard response to any inconvenient questions about the Centralia operation. Then there's the deeply troubling case of the missing records. In 1983, an investigative journalist from Philadelphia tried to piece together the early response to the fire. He submitted Freedom of Information Act requests to multiple agencies, seeking documents from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Resources, the Federal Office of Surface Mining, and the Bureau of Mines. What he discovered was disturbing. When he arrived at the state archives, he found filing cabinets with conspicuous gaps. Reports from 1962 through 1965, covering the crucial early years when critical decisions were made about firefighting strategies, were completely missing. Not misfiled in different folders, not archived in off-site storage facilities, gone without a trace. When pressed for an explanation, officials offered a laughably inadequate response. The documents were lost in a clerical reorganization. But here's the part that should terrify anyone who values government transparency. Only the Centralia files were affected. Every other mine fire case from that same period, involving similar incidents in other Pennsylvania towns, remained perfectly intact and properly filed. What are the odds that a random clerical error would specifically target only the documents related to the most controversial mine fire case in American history? What are the odds that this accident would eliminate precisely the evidence that might have answered the most important questions about government decision-making during the crisis? What if the fire was just an excuse? What if Centralia was sitting on something someone desperately wanted gone? Let me present you with a theory that's been whispered in the hills of Pennsylvania for decades, a theory that certain powerful interests have worked very hard to suppress. In 1961, exactly 1 year before the fire started, a classified geological survey identified unusual mineral deposits beneath Centralia, not just the ordinary coal that had been mined there for over a century, rare earth elements, valuable materials that would become absolutely crucial in the emerging electronics industry of the late 20th century. This wasn't publicly available information. The survey results were immediately classified under national security provisions. But real estate companies with mysterious funding sources suddenly showed intense interest in buying large tracts of land around Centralia. They made offers that seemed too good to be true for a struggling former coal town where the primary industry had already begun its decline. These weren't local companies with recognizable names. They were shell corporations with addresses that led to empty office buildings and phone numbers that went to answering services. They offered prices well above market value for properties that had been difficult to sell just months earlier. Most long-time residents refused these offers. They'd lived in Centralia for generations. Their families had deep roots in the community. This was home, not just real estate to be traded for profit. Then came the fire, and suddenly selling wasn't optional anymore. Consider this timeline carefully. The classified geological survey finishes in late 1961. Corporate land acquisition offers begin in early 1962. The fire starts in May 1962. The government's firefighting efforts are mysteriously ineffective despite significant funding and resources. By 1985, the entire town is condemned and evacuated. Coincidence? Or the most successful forced land grab in American history? But there's something else. Something much darker that goes beyond simple corporate greed or government corruption. In 1987, urban explorers managed to access a series of abandoned mine shafts on the outskirts of what used to be Centralia. Deep in these tunnels, they discovered something that challenged everything historians thought they knew about the area. Carved into the walls of these shafts were symbols, not mining marks left by workers, not modern graffiti tagged by teenagers. These were ancient-looking markings that suggested human presence in the area far older than the town's official founding in 1866. The symbols appeared to be organized in patterns, possibly representing some form of written language that experts couldn't identify or translate. When word of this discovery reached academic circles, archaeologists from several major universities requested permission to study the symbols. They wanted to document them, photograph them, potentially revolutionize understanding of pre-Columbian activity in Pennsylvania. Their requests were immediately denied. The area was declared unsafe due to fire activity, despite thermal imaging that showed no fire activity in those specific tunnels. The symbols remained undisturbed, unexplored, and unexplained for exactly 1 year. Then in 1988, bulldozers arrived without warning and filled all the tunnel entrances with concrete, permanent seals that would prevent anyone from ever accessing those chambers again. They didn't just abandon Centralia, they erased it systematically and deliberately. And the fire? It made sure no one would ever come looking for what was really buried there. Today, officially, only 5 people remain in Centralia, 5 determined holdouts who fought the government in federal court for over a decade and finally won the legal right to live in their homes until they die. After that, the government gets everything. The houses will be demolished. The land will be cleared. The last traces of what was once a thriving American town will disappear forever, as if Centralia never existed at all. But those 5 remaining residents tell stories that don't match the official narrative about a dying town slowly succumbing to environmental disaster. They talk about unmarked vehicles with no license plates patrolling the empty streets at night, stopping to shine floodlights into abandoned lots where houses once stood. They describe survey teams that appear without warning, taking soil samples and underground measurements, then vanish before anyone can approach them or ask questions about their activities. They've witnessed construction crews that work exclusively in the pre-dawn hours, building structures that don't appear on any municipal plans or environmental reports. Concrete foundations that seem to serve no obvious purpose. Metal installations that look more like ventilation systems than fire monitoring equipment. John Lacatis Jr. is one of these holdouts. He's lived in Centralia his entire 73 years. His house sits on South Street, surrounded by empty lots where his neighbors' homes once stood like teeth in a broken smile. The fire, he insists, has never affected his property. His basement remains cool year-round. His air quality tests consistently come back clean. Yet every few months, men in expensive suits show up at his door with new offers to buy him out. The numbers keep getting bigger, much bigger, far beyond what any rational person would pay for a house in a supposedly dying town, threatened by an underground fire. "They want something here," he told a reporter in 2022, his voice heavy with suspicion, earned through decades of watching his community disappear. "And it ain't just the land. There's something down there they need, and they can't get to it while we're still here watching. There's something else the remaining residents have all noticed, something that keeps them awake at night. Strange sounds coming from deep underground. Not the crackling of burning coal or the shifting of heated rock that you might expect from an active mine fire. These are mechanical sounds, drilling equipment, heavy machinery, the unmistakable noise of organized construction work happening far below their feet. It sounds like someone is building something down there. Something big, something they definitely don't want anyone to see. The fire still burns. But maybe it's not the only thing that was buried beneath Centralia, Pennsylvania.